Pirates weren't just swashbuckling criminals with a taste for treasure, they were, in many ways, savvy business people. They had to be. It wasn't just about attacking ships and taking what they could. It was about knowing how to turn theft into profit. When you think of pirates, you probably picture a crew eagerly dividing up a treasure chest full of gold coins. But that's only part of the story. The real gold mine wasn't in treasure chests. It was in careful planning, clever targeting, and minimizing risks while maximizing rewards. Pirates were extremely selective about their targets. Spanish treasure ships were often seen as the ultimate prize. These ships were floating vaults, stuffed to the brim with gold and silver brought back from the Americas. In theory, it sounds like an easy payday, but the reality was far from it. These ships were slow-moving, heavily guarded, and only set out on rare occasions, making them harder to catch. But when the pirate crew managed to capture one, they were set for months, even years, of prosperity. One lucky raid could feed an entire crew with a fortune so large that it could change their lives overnight. However, treasure ships were few and far between, so pirates turned their attention to merchant vessels, which were much more abundant and offered more regular opportunities. These merchant ships weren't loaded with gold or silver, but they were packed with valuable goods like spices, rum, clothing, and tobacco. More importantly, they were easy targets, often smaller crews, fewer weapons, and captains who were more interested in protecting their cargo than fighting to the death over it. Attacking these merchant ships became the bread and butter of pirate operations. It wasn't the same kind of high-stakes gamble as attacking a treasure galleon, but it paid out consistently. Pirates knew that it was better to attack a merchant ship that was less likely to fight back than to risk their lives and ship in pursuit of something far rarer. But even merchant ships weren't just about gold and silver. Pirates saw potential in practically everything. Every piece of cargo had value. They would loot spices from the East Indies, raw sugar from the Caribbean, rum, tobacco, clothing, anything they could turn a profit on. A single successful capture could keep the crew in luxury for months, sometimes longer. Pirates weren't just collecting treasure. They were setting up their next paycheck. And they knew that diversifying their haul meant spreading the risk and keeping their operations afloat. You see, pirates were in the business of survival. It wasn't about hoarding treasure, but creating a sustainable model of consistent profit. From capturing slow-moving merchant ships to raiding coastal towns, pirates capitalized on every opportunity. Pirates didn't just rely on brute force to get what they wanted. They used fear and surprise as their secret weapons. It's no surprise that pirates developed a reputation for terror on the high seas. Their entire operation was built on the psychological warfare of fear. The black flag, that iconic symbol of piracy, was more than just a flag, it was a branding tool. When pirates raised it, it wasn't just about signaling a fight. It was about creating a sense of inevitability in their targets. It was like a death sentence in fabric form. The black flag signaled that surrender was the only viable option. The key here was the element of surprise. Most pirate ships would sail under the flag of a neutral or friendly nation, making their approach seem harmless. Only when they were close enough to the target would they raise the dreaded black flag. By then, the merchant ship was often so terrified that surrendering was the quickest way to avoid bloodshed. In many cases, pirates didn't even need to fire a shot. Around 70% of the ships they targeted surrendered without a single bullet being fired. The mere sight of that black flag was enough to make captains throw up the white flag of surrender. When the ship didn't immediately comply, pirates knew how to back up their threat. Warning shots fired across the bow were a common tactic. If that didn't work, pirates would target the ship's rudder or masts, disabling it without risking the valuable cargo. This was a subtle strategy, crippled the ship enough to make it useless for sailing, but not so much that it could no longer carry its precious load. By disabling a ship without sinking it, pirates maximized their loot and reduced the risk of retaliation. In some cases, the mere appearance of pirates aboard the ship was enough to ensure compliance. A pirate crew, armed with terrifying reputation and fearsome antics, would sometimes resort to extreme measures to make their victims comply. A pirate might light a slow-burning fuse in his beard, creating a cloud of smoke around him, making him look more monstrous than human. These were acts of calculated terror psychological tricks designed to reduce resistance without resorting to violence. It's strange to think, but these pirates knew that terror was often more effective than bloodshed, and the stories of pirate brutality spread like wildfire. The legends grew bigger with each encounter, and soon, pirates didn't need to fight as hard to get what they wanted. Their reputation alone was enough to make most sailors surrender their goods with barely a word of protest. It was a clever, calculated form of business management. The pirates weren't just attacking, they were managing fear, and fear was their most valuable asset. It's fascinating to consider the extent to which pirates built their success on reputation. They didn't just want loot, they wanted power. And the power of fear worked wonders on the high seas. A well-placed psychological tactic could mean the difference between a profitable raid and a violent, costly struggle. The pirates' mastery of reputation management made them formidable opponents. And it's no wonder that their legend endures even today. Pirates were more than just thieves, they were marketers of terror. Ah, the loot. That's what most people picture when they think of pirates. Chests of gold and silver stacked to the brim. But in reality, the business of piracy wasn't as glamorous as the movies would have us believe. Most pirates didn't live out their days buried in treasure chests full of gold coins. In fact, most of them didn't even see a single coin of gold during their careers. You see, pirates were in the business of stealing, but they were also in the business of turning stolen goods into profit. And that's where the real complexity of piracy began. For most pirates, treasure was a rare find. Sure, Spanish treasure galleons were the ultimate prize, and yes, they were sometimes worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Those ships were essentially floating vaults, stuffed with gold and silver from the Americas. But treasure ships were the exception, not the rule. These ships were slow-moving and heavily guarded, making them hard to catch. Pirates knew that capturing these treasure ships would keep their crews living large for months, if not years. But those treasure ships were few and far between. So, pirates turned their attention to merchant vessels, the bread and butter of their operations. Merchant ships carried everything from basic supplies to luxury goods like spices, silk, and even fine fabrics. These vessels weren't usually as well armed or heavily crewed, which made them prime targets. Pirates didn't need to deal with big, armed ships or risk getting into bloody battles. They just had to strike quickly and disable the merchant ships before they could escape or call for help. But what made merchant ships so enticing was the variety of goods they carried. Whether it was sugar, tobacco, or textiles, pirates could always find a market for what they stole. They didn't need gold to make a fortune, they just needed to be clever about what they took. The real challenge came after a successful raid: how to turn that stolen loot into cash. It wasn't like pirates could waltz into any port and start selling stolen goods, at least not without risking a run-in with the law. Most pirate ships had to rely on a network of shady merchants, corrupt officials, and black market ports where stolen goods could be sold without too many questions being asked. Places like Nassau, Tortuga, and Port Royal were pirate havens where stolen goods flowed freely. These lawless towns were like pirate malls, where pirates could unload their goods without fear of arrest. Nassau, in particular, became the epicenter of piracy in the Caribbean, with over 2,000 pirates calling it home during its heyday. But what about those goods that couldn't be easily sold in the open market? Well, pirates had a solution for that too. Some of the stolen goods could be sold through more discreet means, like backroom deals in major coastal cities. In places like Boston or Lisbon, pirates could find willing buyers who would purchase stolen goods, launder them, and then sell them through legitimate channels. Of course, this meant the pirates had to sell at a steep discount, often only getting 20–30% of the goods' actual value. It wasn't the most ideal scenario, but it was better than keeping stolen goods that couldn't be sold. And as the years went on, pirates got more creative, even creating false identities and starting legitimate businesses to sell stolen goods under the guise of respectability. Some pirates, after a successful career of plundering, would transition into legitimate merchants, quietly retiring from piracy but still reaping the profits of their earlier work. What's interesting about all of this is how similar the pirate economy was to modern-day businesses. Pirates weren't just thieves, they were savvy businessmen who understood how to turn stolen goods into profit, how to manage their brand, and how to navigate the complex world of black market sales. It wasn't all about being a swashbuckling rogue. Piracy was, in many ways, a carefully planned, well-executed business model. And like any good business model, it involved a great deal of creativity, networking, and risk management. Let's be honest for a second, being a pirate wasn't all treasure hunts and round-field nights on the high seas. There was also a very real economy behind the scenes, one that required some pretty impressive financial management. The pirates didn't just get to plunder goods and immediately head to the nearest tavern to spend their loot, though that definitely happened. No, they had to manage their wealth, and that meant a surprisingly democratic approach to profit sharing. Pirate crews were well known for their highly structured system of dividing up the spoils of any successful raid. Sure, the captain usually took the biggest cut, because someone had to steer the ship, after all, but the system was surprisingly egalitarian for a band of ruthless sea dogs. Pirates would sign articles of agreement before setting sail, outlining exactly how the loot would be divided. This system ensured everyone knew their share, which was crucial for maintaining morale and preventing mutiny. After all, pirates weren't exactly known for being patient or forgiving when it came to matters of money. It wasn't just the loot that had to be divided, though. Pirates also needed a compensation plan in case things went south, literally. Injuries, which were common in the perilous life of a pirate, needed to be accounted for. This wasn't just for show either. Pirates often had a sort of disability insurance system. Losing a limb or suffering a serious injury could result in substantial compensation, usually in the form of pieces of eight, the currency of the time. A pirate who lost an arm might receive 600 pieces of eight, which is equivalent to a small fortune in today's money. It wasn't perfect, but it was a pretty decent system considering the violent lifestyle. Beyond that, pirates also had to deal with the occasional legal or logistical challenge of selling stolen goods. While we imagine pirate ships brimming with treasure, the reality was a bit more mundane. Most pirates would settle for crates of spices, textiles, or even barrels of rum. It wasn't exactly what you'd expect from the treasure-filled adventures we see in movies, but those everyday goods could still fetch a pretty penny, especially when sold through the right channels. Speaking of channels, that's where the real skill came in. How did pirates get rid of all this stolen stuff without getting caught? This is where their business savvy really shone. They didn't just rely on pirate ports like Nassau or Tortuga. Some pirates had extensive networks of corrupt officials, shady merchants, and even other pirates who helped move the goods further inland or to other ports where they could be sold for a profit. And while it wasn't exactly above board, it worked. The stolen goods would be sold at a fraction of their actual value, think 20 to 30%, just to keep the transaction under wraps. For the pirates, it was a small price to pay for the anonymity. But here's the kicker. While they were turning stolen goods into profit, many pirates actually preferred to keep some of the loot for themselves. Why sell it when you could enjoy the spoils of war directly? A good silk shirt, a new coat, or a nice pair of boots. These were common purchases for pirates who suddenly found themselves flush with cash. And let's not forget the occasional acquisition of fine jewelry or luxury items, often used as personal adornment, which only added to the pirates' fearsome reputations. As they plundered and pillaged, they weren't just stockpiling treasure, they were stockpiling a whole new wardrobe. The way pirates spent their wealth was fascinating too. Unlike the careful saving we'd expect from modern business practices, pirates had a reputation for burning through their loot faster than they could make it. Taverns, gambling, and extravagant clothing were some of the biggest drains on pirate wealth. But that's not all. Pirates were known for their love of a good time, and they weren't shy about spending their earnings on more frivolous pleasures. But honestly, it makes sense when you think about it. For pirates, every day at sea was a gamble. If you survived the storm, the battle, or the treacherous waters, then you deserved a little fun. It's also important to point out that not all pirates lived the high life. Many spent years sailing the seas with little to show for it, especially when their ships were constantly at risk of being seized by the navy or destroyed by storms. That's what made piracy a feast or famine kind of life. One day you could be eating like a king, and the next you could be starving on a ship, hoping for your next big catch. Pirates were business people. After all, not just reckless outlaws who spent their days plundering the seas. They needed to turn their stolen goods into cash. And to do that, They relied on a thriving underground economy that connected them to all corners of the Caribbean, Europe, and beyond. Now, imagine this: a bustling marketplace, hidden away from the law, where stolen goods were traded, swapped, and sold in plain sight. That's essentially what pirate havens like Nassau, Tortuga, and Port Royal were. They were bustling black markets where pirates could unload their loot with little to no interference from the authorities, well, except for the authorities that were bribed to look the other way. Nassau, for example, became the unofficial capital of piracy during the early 1700s. This lawless paradise hosted over 2,000 pirates at its peak, not to mention hundreds of pirate vessels. The town was essentially a pirate-run republic, with its own self-governing system. Pirates didn't just steal from merchant ships and then sail away to parts unknown. They came to Nassau to trade, socialize, and prepare for their next big heist. The goods they stole would flow freely through makeshift markets, and no one batted an eye. If you wanted spices from India, silk from China, or tobacco from the American colonies, Nassau had it. Then there was Tortuga. Initially, the French attempted to keep the pirates in check, but by 1660, the island had turned into a pirate haven. The French government eventually gave up trying to police the place, and it became a base for pirates to operate out of. The island had taverns, brothels, and warehouses, all designed for storing and selling stolen goods. Essentially, Tortuga was like an enormous warehouse full of contraband. The economy was so reliant on piracy that it ran almost entirely on stolen goods, and the pirate presence made it virtually impossible to avoid. Of course, these pirate towns had a mix of shady dealings, corruption, and outright lawlessness. Merchants would gladly purchase stolen goods at a fraction of their actual value, knowing that the risk was worth the reward. Corrupt officials often received bribes to let pirate ships dock in their ports, where they could offload their goods with minimal scrutiny. The town's economy was tied to piracy, and it was virtually impossible to separate the two. If you were a merchant in one of these towns, you knew what you were dealing with. If you could buy a crate of stolen sugar or rum on the cheap, why wouldn't you? But not all of the black market dealings happened in these overt pirate ports. Pirates had a wide network of secret buyers who operated in major coastal cities like Boston, Lisbon, and Charleston. These buyers didn't operate in the open, but they were known to pay a fraction of the value for stolen goods. Essentially, they were laundering the merchandise, making it easier for pirates to offload it and avoid getting caught. One of the most fascinating aspects of this underground economy was the role of corrupt officials. Some harbor masters, customs agents, and colonial governors were so closely tied to piracy that they were willing to look the other way or even assist pirates in forging papers to make stolen goods appear legitimate. In fact, there were even instances where colonial officials earned more money from helping pirates than from their actual government salary. This added a whole new layer of complexity to the pirate trade and made the underground market all the more vibrant. As pirates continued to plunder and trade stolen goods, their underground economy became more sophisticated. Smuggling networks, bribed officials, and corrupt merchants formed an intricate web that stretched across the Atlantic. Goods could pass through several hands before reaching their final destination, effectively laundering the pirates' fingerprints off the merchandise. A crate of cinnamon could change hands 5 or 6 times before it found its way to a spice shop in London, making the pirates' theft virtually untraceable. At the heart of this underground economy was the constant flow of stolen goods being converted into cash. Pirates made sure their wealth didn't sit idle, they kept it moving, circulating it back into the economy. If they didn't, the risk of getting caught or losing their wealth to rival pirates or naval patrols would increase. Now that pirates had their stolen goods, how did they actually turn those plundered treasures into cash? This was the ultimate test of their business acumen. Unlike the popular portrayal of pirates as treasure-hoarding hoarders, the reality was much more mundane. Pirates needed to sell their loot to stay afloat and fund their future heists. However, they couldn't exactly walk into a mainstream marketplace and sell a chest of stolen gold without raising suspicion. So, pirates had to be strategic. Enter the secret pirate ports and shady buyers who operated under the radar. The pirates' go-to spots were places like Nassau, Tortuga, and Port Royal locations that catered specifically to them and turned a blind eye to the origin of their goods. At these black market hubs, pirates could unload their loot with little risk of getting caught. These towns became the perfect melting pots for stolen merchandise, where items like gold, spices, rum, and clothing were traded openly. Ironically, while piracy was illegal, the towns practically encouraged it by offering safe havens and providing the necessary infrastructure for pirates to profit from their deeds. But selling stolen goods wasn't always as easy as finding a willing buyer. As anyone who's tried to offload something shady can tell you, there's a certain amount of risk involved in doing business this way. Pirates didn't exactly get full market value for their goods. Everything they sold came with a discount. The goods were often sold at 20 to 30% of their actual value because buyers knew they were getting stolen items. But even at these low rates, the pirates still made a profit. Spices like nutmeg and cinnamon, which were highly sought after in Europe, were worth more than gold by weight. Interestingly, many pirates didn't always sell everything they stole. Sometimes they kept items like clothing, jewelry, or luxury goods for themselves. Pirates, despite their rough profession, weren't immune to vanity. They often wore fine silks, gold earrings, and other clothing items that once belonged to wealthy merchants or aristocrats. It was as if wearing these goods was their own way of flaunting their success on the high seas, a way of marking their status. But it wasn't just about keeping a lavish wardrobe. Pirates also had a practical approach to their stolen goods. Items like rum, sugar, and tobacco were constantly in demand. These commodities were perfect for both personal use and resale. Rum, especially, was a staple on pirate ships, often used as currency for bartering. It wasn't unusual for pirate crews to become too intoxicated to manage their ships properly. But hey, who's counting? When your day involves seizing merchant vessels and surviving naval battles, a little rum was often seen as a necessity. As for tobacco, it was a steady moneymaker. With the growing popularity of smoking across Europe, pirate crews who seized tobacco shipments found themselves holding a highly valuable commodity. Ships loaded with tobacco would make huge profits for pirates, and their loot was even easier to sell than precious metals or expensive fabrics. The truly fascinating aspect of pirate wealth was how it was distributed among the crew. Pirates didn't operate like a traditional hierarchical business. Instead, they had one of the earliest forms of profit sharing. Every pirate had an agreement that laid out their share of the loot, and this system helped maintain order and morale on the ship. Pirates were rewarded based on rank and contribution. A pirate captain, for instance, might receive 5 or 6 shares of the bounty, while a regular crew member will get 1 share. Crew members who proved themselves as specialists, like surgeons, gunners, or navigators, would get additional shares to reflect their expertise. But it wasn't just about the loot, it was about survival. Pirates had a surprisingly democratic system. They often voted on important decisions, and even the captain could be replaced if the crew wasn't satisfied with his leadership. In a sense, this made pirate ships almost a miniature society with its own rules, governance, and culture. Pirates who had become wealthy from their plundering would often live comfortably for a time, but the nature of their profession meant their wealth was often fleeting. Pirates didn't save for the future. They spent their earnings fast, and usually on rum, gambling, clothing, or women, essentially treating every moment as a fleeting celebration. After all, who knew when a naval patrol would come along or when a rival pirate might attack? Despite the transient nature of pirate wealth, the system they created for themselves was remarkably efficient. Pirate crews shared the spoils of war based on a clearly defined set of rules, making sure that everyone from the captain down to the cabin boy had a stake in their success. And while pirates may have spent their loot quickly, they ensured a constant flow of goods from their pillaging, feeding both the pirate economy and the broader black market. While piracy is often romanticized in popular culture, there's a darker, far more grim side to the pirates' wealth-building enterprise. As profitable as raiding ships carrying gold and luxury goods could be, pirates also targeted vessels involved in the transatlantic slave trade. This unfortunate part of pirate history is often glossed over in stories of swashbuckling adventures and buried treasure, but it's a stark reality of the 17th and 18th centuries. Pirates didn't raid slave ships because they cared about the suffering of the people on board. Rather, they did it for the same reason they raided any other vessel: profit. Ships transporting human beings were considered valuable cargo. Once pirates seized these vessels, they could sell the enslaved people in ports where slavery was still legal. While pirates didn't usually benefit from selling slaves directly to plantations, they would often sell them to slave traders or other pirates who operated in the trade. One of the most chilling aspects of piracy was the casual way pirates treated the lives of those they captured. The captives were nothing more than another form of cargo, and pirates would sometimes simply abandon them if they were of no value to their operations. However, for those who did sell the enslaved people, it was an added financial boon. The profits from these operations went into the pirate economy, further fueling their pillaging endeavors. This dark chapter in pirate history reveals a cruel side of piracy that is rarely portrayed. As the global demand for slaves grew, pirates became increasingly involved in this illicit trade. The high value of human labor in the colonies made the idea of capturing slaves too lucrative to ignore. This involvement wasn't limited to pirates alone. Many governments, including the British, French, and Spanish, actively participated in and supported the slave trade. Pirates simply saw an opportunity to profit from a system that was already entrenched in global commerce. The involvement of pirates in the slave trade also highlights a disturbing truth. Piracy wasn't always about challenging the system. It was about exploiting the system for personal gain. The same pirates who fought against imperial navies and attacked merchant vessels for gold and rum were sometimes also aiding and abetting the very same imperial systems they claimed to despise. This contradiction is one of the complexities of pirate life. They were both rebels and profiteers, sometimes simultaneously. Despite this dark side, the pirate economy continued to thrive, with stolen goods flowing freely through their black market channels. Once they had their loot, pirates needed a place to sell it, and just as they had safe ports for hiding, they had similarly secretive ways of moving and selling stolen slaves. Secret buyers, merchants with dubious backgrounds, and corrupt officials played a key role in this underground economy, helping pirates wash their ill-gotten goods and sell them without getting caught. Ironically, some pirates became wealthy enough to retire into respectable society. Many of them left piracy behind and used their wealth to buy land, establish businesses, or become merchants in legitimate trade. It was a transition that made sense. Once they had accumulated enough stolen wealth, pirates found it easier to blend into the fabric of society, hiding in plain sight. It wasn't uncommon for former pirates to start over with new identities, leaving behind the black flag and their notorious pasts. Some even became respectable landowners or politicians in the Caribbean, cementing their place in the world they had once raided. However, these transitions from piracy to respectable merchant life were not as common as one might think. The majority of pirates were eventually either captured, killed, or died in battle or from disease. For those who managed to retire early or live out their lives in peace, they often did so with a substantial fortune, though much of it derived from less than savory means. The historical record shows that the vast majority of pirate crews didn't retire with their loot, but instead lived fast and died young. The pirate life was unpredictable, and there was no retirement plan except, perhaps, a quick death or an escape to a quiet life as a new identity in a new land. The piracy of the 17th and 18th centuries was a complicated and multifaceted phenomenon. While we often think of pirates as simply thieves on the high seas, their impact went beyond stealing gold or raiding coastal settlements. The darker side of their business, their role in the slave trade, was an integral part of their economic activity. Pirate crews didn't just take treasure, they took human lives, and the profits from these activities helped fund their ongoing campaigns of theft and violence. Despite the romanticized image of pirates as rebels and freedom fighters, the reality was far murkier, with pirates sometimes complicit in the very systems they were purported to be fighting against. When you think of pirates, you probably picture treasure chests overflowing with gold coins and jewels. While this image has become synonymous with the pirate life, the reality was far more practical and far less glamorous. Pirates weren't simply looking for treasure for the thrill of it, they were in it for the profit, and their method of dividing that profit was surprisingly democratic. Pirate crews contrary to what many might imagine, were structured around a system of equity, where everyone got a share of the loot, according to their role and risk. Pirate compensation was governed by what was known as the Articles of Agreement, which served as a kind of contract for all crew members. Before setting out on a voyage, each pirate crew would sign these articles, which clearly defined how the spoils of piracy would be divided. These articles were not just a formality, they were binding. Breaking the contract could result in severe penalties, including being marooned on a deserted island or losing one's share of the loot. In a way, these articles acted as one of the earliest forms of collective bargaining. At the top of the pirate hierarchy was the captain, who, although respected, didn't enjoy the wealth disparity seen in modern business structures. While captains did receive a higher share, usually 5 or 6 shares, this was far from the exorbitant pay one might expect for leading a crew. This more modest share structure reflected the egalitarian nature of pirate ships, where the leadership was earned through merit rather than lineage or wealth. In fact, the captain could be replaced if the crew felt his leadership was no longer effective, making piracy a truly merit-based form of leadership, despite the violence and chaos surrounding it. The real backbone of pirate crew compensation, however, was injury compensation. Pirates lived a dangerous life, far more dangerous than anything you'd experience at your office job, and injuries were common. So much so that the pirate articles included provisions for compensating crew members who were maimed or injured during raids. The loss of a limb or an eye could lead to a compensation payout in the form of pieces of eight, the currency of the time, or even slaves, depending on the nature of the injury. This was essentially an early form of disability insurance, albeit a rough and ready version. While the higher-ups got more, the rank-and-file pirates still earned far more than their counterparts in the navy or merchant ships. An average pirate could earn up to 10 times more than a merchant sailor during a successful raid. This made piracy a highly attractive alternative to life as a merchant seaman, where the pay was low, the work was grueling, and the danger of death was ever present. Pirate crews weren't just made up of hardened criminals. Many of them were former sailors who jumped ship for a better life, a life that, for the most part, offered high rewards with low overhead. Yet, for all the riches pirates could acquire, the spoils of piracy were short-lived. Pirates were notorious for their inability to manage money. They weren't exactly known for saving for the future, which is why their financial history can be summed up in 3 words: spend it fast. Many pirates blew through their wealth at a staggering pace, spending their earnings on booze, gambling, and clothes. This was a lifestyle of instant gratification, with no thought to long-term security. Taverns and gambling halls were the primary recipients of pirate wealth, with some pirates being so addicted to the life of luxury that they would spend their earnings before they even left port. Despite the brief bursts of wealth, piracy wasn't a stable career. The feast or famine nature of their business meant that many pirates went for long periods without making any profit at all. When the winds of fortune were favorable, however, pirates could rake in unimaginable amounts of wealth. For instance, in 1695, after capturing a richly laden merchant ship, a pirate crew member received goods worth 94 pounds, which was about 3 years' worth of wages for a sailor. Similarly, in 1720, pirates who captured an East India Company ship made off with over 1,000 pounds each, enough to last a lifetime. But these were rare occurrences. With that kind of instability in their finances, pirates lived with an acute awareness of their mortality. Life on the high seas was dangerous, and wealth was fleeting. So they spent their loot as quickly as they earned it, living for the moment, and perhaps even enjoying the thrill of spending as much as the thrill of plunder itself. For the most part, pirates didn't see the point of saving for the future. They lived a life of risk and reward, with each voyage offering the potential for wealth and the possibility of death. It's easy to imagine pirates as ruthless, money-hungry thieves, but the reality was much more nuanced. Pirates weren't just out to get rich. They were building a system of compensation that allowed them to thrive, even if only for a short while. This system of profit-sharing and mutual support helped pirates weather the storms of piracy, offering a sense of community and fairness in an otherwise brutal world. But at the end of the day, piracy was a risky business. Whether they struck it rich or ended up broke, pirates knew that their lives were on the line with every raid, and their fortunes could change as quickly as the tide.